Stumps and Stories podcast with Nishat Pai Vaidya.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Stumps and Stories, where we explore different tales from the cricketing world, and we love to bring to you different perspectives. But before we move ahead, I would request everyone to subscribe to our podcast, whichever podcast platform you're joining us from, be it Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and follow us across all social media platforms. On this episode, I'm really privileged to invite someone who I call a friend and who I've known for quite a long time. Now, this man's journey has been really fascinating because I've watched it even before I entered the industry, but it's been one where he's gone around telling stories about the sport, and stories in a way that they are more captivating. I don't know if the stories themselves are captivating or his own style is, but Bharat Sundaresan is one man whose work I used to read very early in my days in the profession, and it was just his knack of putting words together. Now, one of the things that struck out about Bharat Sundaresan is his long hair, obviously, and we would obviously compare him to someone like an MS Dhoni. But like the man who became a cricketing legend, Bharat also treaded his own path. And he initially worked at Indian Express. Today, he lives in Australia. He's a professional cricket commentator. He's commentated on big events, including the Ashes. He travels around the globe, has written some fascinating books, The Dhoni Touch being one of them. And he's written The Miracle Makers. Am I right? I think that's the title of the book. I've got it, but I just want the exact title. But he's written Miracle Makers about India's remarkable 2020-2021 series win in Australia. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Bharat. Bharat, thank you so much for joining us from Adelaide. And let me tell the viewers that this has been recorded in advance. So Bharat is joining us a couple of days before his flight to India for the World Cup. So Bharat, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Nishad. Yeah, and also for your really kind words. I'm glad you said you used to read me in your early days of in the profession. Yeah, for a second, I thought you were going to say you used to read me in your early days, which would have made me. The term veteran gets thrown around already. Like, I've been doing this for this is my 16th year, so I never thought I'll reach a point doing anything in life where I'll be called a veteran. But well, here I am. I'm not very old, but I have been doing this for a long time. But no, really, thanks again for your really lovely introduction. And yeah, you already made me feel very special.
And I must also tell the viewers that if this wasn't a podcast, our conversation would be in Hindi and Marathi. So we are making an exception to that today.
Very much. I mean, very good quality Hindi and Marathi from your side, and
Yes.
some very poor quality, low standard Hindi Marathi from me.
Oh, I thought good quality, you meant some words that we
Oh
mean
well, no.
good quality. But Bharat, I'd like to start by where I sort of took notice of how you do things differently. And I would also like to narrate this story because I was there on that day, and this was when a kid called Pranav Dhanawade scored 1,000 runs in a school game. This was up in Kalyan, a suburb that's about 50 kilometers north of Mumbai. And I managed to get there. I had a couple of assignments. Last minute, they turned up and people wanted me to write about it. I was just getting into the world of freelancing. And I managed to string things together, didn't have too much experience. And it really intimidated me. But then I read your story, and your story had a lot of color in it. You had spoken to people who I had not even thought about talking to. And it just made me realize how we can actually tell stories about the cricket field without really, uh, you know, overstepping the mark in the sense that use these big words, but at the same time painting a picture. So can you just tell me a little bit about that and that story as well?
Yeah. No, I mean, look, you mentioned storytelling quite a few times there in your introduction, and even now, and that's what I've always considered myself to be, a storyteller. And I've been a storyteller all my life. Like from the time I was a little kid, I remember coming back home from kindergarten and narrating what happened in school to my mother. And I also have I can't speak in just one voice. So every time I narrate an anecdote or an incident, I break into different characters, and that's just how I've always told stories. And I remember doing that even as a 4 or 5 year old. kid, I would show my mother how a certain child was crying in class or whatever it was. So that's always been my. I've always, like I said, considered myself a storyteller. That's always been almost my go-to for everything. I love talking, obviously, as you well know, and anyone who's ever met me for more than a half a minute would know. But it's always everything's a story. Like my wife always complains, everything has to be a story, and I think that's what I brought into journalism. I wasn't in a natural. I've never been a natural journalist. I'm obviously good at reporting. I've done it for so long. I wrote for a newspaper, like you said, for 10 years. So you get better at reporting. But my strength was always telling stories. So, and now once you say that your strength is telling stories, every story, whatever it is, even if it's just a story of what I did today, cannot be said in just it can't be said with just one angle, right? There's so many different angles to every story. Even like I said, what I did this morning. I'm sure the dogs have their own opinion of what I did and what I didn't do. So there are always many characters that lead to a story, or that you can tap into to get their perspective. And especially a story like Pranav Danawade, the most obvious story is the fact that he made 1,000 runs. The whole world was talking about it. Like you said, BBC had a big story out on him, and he became an overnight sensation. But somehow, and I don't know whether it's instinct. I think a lot of it is instinct. As journalists, one thing I've learned in all these years is I don't think you can teach journalism to anyone. You can teach people to write. You can teach people to maybe become better at interviewing. But the journalistic instinct, I guess you just have it or you don't. And something about that didn't strike. Like something didn't seem not. I wouldn't say it didn't seem right, but it felt like there was more to it than just the fact that a kid has made a big score. Because we're used to in Bombay, especially, kids making big scores, as you know, in school cricket, right? If one guy scores 300, the other day someone scores 400, or Sarfraz will make 500, or Prithvi Shaw will make 600. That we're used to that. But those were in more more recognized competitions, or at least in recognized games, and at venues closer to us, in the sense closer to Bombay than Thane, if that makes sense. And so something, like I said, there had to be more to it. That's what got me thinking. And the only way to figure out what happened was to actually go to the venue. And this was a few days after it had happened, to kind of gauge, okay, fine, a kid makes 1,000 or 1,100 runs and he's hit whatever it was, 300 boundaries or whatever it was. But how does anyone at any level hit 300 boundaries, right? We've also played the sport. We played gully cricket. We played school cricket. We played university cricket. There has to be a catch. And as soon as I saw the ground, it was very obvious, like the boundaries were short. But that's fine, right? Like, so then the next thing is, okay, so who was he playing against? Like, who were these bowlers? And that took me to the school of the opposition, or the kids who had been bashed around by Pranav. So it took me to their school, and then and I really wanted to see who these bowlers were that he was facing, and that's how I encountered those four lovely kids who poor things had to bowl at Pranav and his team, and then it became clear what had really happened. I mean, look, yeah, Pranav Danawade, I mean, whatever level, whoever you're facing, it takes a lot to make 1,000 runs. Agreed. But you also have to put into context who he was facing. And they were these tiny kids, as the story goes, who could barely get the ball across. Which is why I made them pose like Croft, Roberts Holding in Ghana. That was my great idea. I think more than the story or everything else, the fact that I got them to pose like that for that picture made me really happy. But but that's the case with any story, right? Whether you're writing about something like that, that's a unique story, or you're writing a daily report about what cricket's going on, or watching a net session. Everything is a story. Everything has there's a narrative, there's a plot. It's up to you as the storyteller or as the journalist or the writer to kind of understand that plot and then to unravel it. And I think that's the secret of storytelling, regardless of whether you do it in print or you tell stories on podcasts or on radio or on TV or wherever you go.
And what is it about cricket? Like, you can look behind me and I can see behind you as well. We have a lot of books, and I've got The Art of Captaincy here. Then there's, there's Sunny Days, there's Idols. There's obviously Bishan, the portrait of a cricketer, and of course it goes on until here where
Yeah,
we've
of
got
course.
Sachin Tendulkar, Saurav Ganguly. Now, some of them are, of course, autobiographies. But what is it about cricket, you think, that we've got a lot of literature, we've got a lot of things written, and there are so many anecdotal books, like my two books as well.
Yeah.
They were all anecdotal rather than um, uh, a recount of history. It was all anecdotes. So, what is it special that you think cricket has that allows people like us to tell those stories? Because the essence of this podcast is also telling stories.
I'll sum it up in one word: time. It just goes on for so long. And which is one of the main reasons I think the art of long form storytelling will always be around. But if, from a cricket perspective, I think it'll change or it'll go away, which is one of the main reasons people like you and I, not just in terms of the books we read or the books we collect, it's also in the case of what podcasts we listen to or what podcasts interest us, right? There are a million cricket podcasts right now about a contemporary cricket, about what's happening, about Ashwin making it to the Indian side or Manas Labuschagne coming into the Australian side. But the ones that the real cricket tragics like you and I are pulled towards are ones that deal with nostalgia, right? Because not just our time, but time even before then, there was just so much more time in cricket. You go back to the origins of cricket, everything from just how long it used to take the Australians to travel to England by ship and then to come back. The more time you spend, the more stories there are. Like I said, everything is a story. I have people, and you know how big a fan of pro wrestling I am. The people in pro wrestling always say everything in life is wrestling. And it's true. I agree with that as well. But you just extend that. Everything in life is a story. So the more time you have, the more stories that will come about, and the more stories you can build. And that's what happened back in the day. Like which is why cricket felt like it was a sport which could be romanticized a lot more than a lot of other sports. I mean, you take soccer among global games. Yes, I mean, it's a fascinating sport to watch and a fascinating sport to, I'm sure, write about as well. But it doesn't lend itself to long form stories because purely because you get to the ground, you watch the sport and you're gone, right? Unlike cricket, where especially when you cover a test match, even now, you just spend the whole day in a cricket press box or in a commentary box, right? Where there are a lot of gaps where you have to fill up time, whether you're on doing commentary on radio or even if you're just sitting in a press box watching the cricket. There's just so much time on your hands. That automatically means, people who are doing it have more stories to tell, but also people who are interested in it or keen on it are keener to listen to more stories. But because cricket's going a certain way where everything's getting shrunk, I think that art will go away as well, or it'll take a different. Nothing goes away, in my opinion, or in my world. But it'll just have to take a different form because just think about it. There have been 15 IPL seasons, and I'm not saying there aren't stories around the IPL, but even now you can just pick out like a test series from 20 years ago or 30 years ago when we were just fans and we were just watching it, and you can break it down into so many stories. Like, or why go that far back? The Miracle Makers. You spoke about my book, and thanks for that. It's still out in shops. You can go buy it. There you go. Cheap plug. It's a test series which had 4 test matches. Yeah, I mean, everybody knows what happened, but there's so much that happened around the test series that it lends itself to a book. I don't think, there are people out there writing beautifully on T20 cricket, but does it, how often can you write a book on an IPL season, for example, right? It just doesn't happen. There's just things that happen so fast, and there's a constant, cricket's become a sport in perpetual motion. Like, that's how I describe Australian rules football, but cricket's sort of got there as well. And I think which is why that art is, or just even the time that people have on their hands is diminishing just generally in society, which is why I think that's going away. But the reason it survived for so long is cricket just is one of those sports, right? People liken it to life itself and all of that. But it does make sense. A lot of and like going back to stories from the time of the cavemen and women, there have always been stories, right? They used to carve stuff in the caves. But it was, and what was it about? It was about good versus evil. It was about someone winning, someone losing. It was about betrayal. It was about opportunity. It was about disappointment. It was about tragedy, which kind of cricket, because of the time it's played over, and just the nature of it, where you play a ball and then you take a breath, and you play a ball and you take a breath, which doesn't happen in too many other sports. I think has just been made for storytelling, and which is why people like you and I, apart from being Indian and loving cricket, I think have gravitated towards this aspect of it.
Absolutely. And let's go to your main book. Like I call it the main book because I say that this book shouldn't only be read by cricket fans, shouldn't only be read by Chennai Super Kings or India fans or Dhoni lovers. I think it's an essential for anyone who wants to do something in life. Because here's this guy, I would say here's this kid who grew up playing cricket in Ranchi. Ranchi, a city which didn't even have a proper cricket ground, just dreamt of playing for India, isn't picked in the under 19 team, has to go to a nondescript corner of the country and work in the railways, still holds on to that dream, but little by little, gradually, on the weight of his power, talent, makes it to the highest level, is stereotypically typecast. And I bring that up, which is why in my introduction I said the similar thing between Bharat and Dhoni is the hair, because the first thing you noticed about him was the hair. And you thought, who's this guy? Where's he come from? Can he really play? I still remember there was talk about that when he made his debut. And you've articulated that in your book. You've peeled the layers of MS Dhoni. Now, MS Dhoni, there's an image, right? This world-class, legendary cricketer, a larger-than-life figure. But you've gone and spoken to people who were behind him when he was a nobody, who believed in him when he hadn't made it. And it beautifully brings to light the kind of struggle he's been through and how he's gone on to achieve whatever he has. Tell us about that. And of course, please start by telling me about the hair thing, because I think even MS has pointed it out to you a couple of times.
Oh, many, many times. He was at one point I had to pull him aside and say, like, what do you have against my hair? Because there was a point in the West Indies in 2017 when his wife got involved as well. His wife would come up to me, and she was on tour. This was just a one-day series
just after the Champions Trophy.
That's right. Yeah, this is right after the Champions Trophy. The whole controversy around Anil Kumble and Virat Kohli and all of that. So MS Dhoni was very much a part of that side. And I remember his wife getting involved, and she had heard MS talk to me about my hair and the whole bal kat le yaar, or cut your hair, as you would always tell me. And she heard it a few times, and she was like, "Look, I'm doing nothing. Why don't you come to my room and I'll give you a haircut?" I was like this whole something is not right with your family. You're really a bit too I don't know. No, I wouldn't say obsessed, but there's something really about my hair that puts you off, or sends you to grab a pair of scissors. I don't know. So it did become a running joke between us. But the hair played a big role. You're right. Because I posted a picture, funnily enough, I found a picture. Someone sent it to me from my last day as a short-haired guy. In the sense, the day I decided I'm never going to have.
I replied to your tweet, by the way.
I know you did. And funnily enough, like we speak about cricket and stories. Something very significant happened on that day. It was July 29, 2002. And that was the day Ajit Agarkar made that 600 at Lords. And on that same evening, my brother left for the US for good. He's never come back to India, or he's visited India a few times. But, and we've not really met each other much, my brother and I. And we're not very close, but cricket always kept us together. So a lot of things went into that photo when I saw it. It brought out a lot of emotion. And so I already had, long before MS Dhoni came into the picture, I was the guy with the long hair. But, I had my own past, rather interesting past, where I played drums in a metal band and a lot of other things that went along with it, which you know about. And then that's around the time MS Dhoni breaks onto the scene in 2005. So obviously the first thing was the comparisons being made with him and I, there's another long-haired guy like Bharat playing for India. How's that possible? And you're right, especially in a country like India, but actually it's universal. When you think cricketer, you have an image in your head, right? When you think journalist, you have an image in your head. Neither MS Dhoni or I really fit the bill, respectively, of being a cricketer or a journalist.
Yeah, I'll just interrupt you there, because you speak about image, and the image I had of Dhoni, without hearing him speak before his first 100, was that he must be some brash youngster who just has
Yes.
come to throw his bat around. But when you heard him speak, you did realize the level of clarity in his thought.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and it's a thing that, like, just compare that to like my early years of having long hair. I remember my mother's friends, like, I come from a very conservative South Indian family. A lot of my mother's friends would come and tell my mother in front of me that, oh, don't worry, Usha, your son will be fine. He's just going through a bad phase. And my mother would be like, no, no, he's fine. He's actually a pretty good child, really. I mean, he's a good son. And they would not believe her. They would think that she was in denial just because I didn't fit the image of being a good son. Like, I had long hair, I dressed interestingly, I did interesting things, which was not the norm. And a lot of that has to do with, or a lot of that you can see with MS Dhoni as well, right? Whether it's his hair or the way he like you described beautifully, he broke into cricket. So even though he became this legend in his early days, some of his peers, and I didn't name them, which is why I start the book with that anecdote. I just happened to be there in the hotel lobby, and I overheard a couple of his peers dismissing MS Dhoni, saying, "Arey, iska koi interest nahi hai. He just likes his bikes and his long hair. He's not keen on cricket." Because until that point, especially in Indian cricket, he didn't fit the mold of being a cricketer, not just in terms of how he looked, but even the route that he'd taken, the journey that he had been on. And then, as it turned out, those two were proven wrong. So were a lot of people around Indian cricket, I'm sure, at that point. That's MS Dhoni. And by the time Penguin approached me to write the book, he had already become a legend. He'd won World Cups and all, every ICC tournament there was to win, IPL trophies, all of that. But I always was intrigued by the makings of MS Dhoni. And to be honest, that also had a lot to do with how I connected with him at a different level in terms of just being different. And in most countries, it's different being different. But especially in a country like India, when you're different, you don't fit the template. The one question everybody around you asks is why? Like, why do you have to be this way? Even though you're not being different, you're actually, the word that should be used is you're just being yourself. And I think that's the beauty of MS Dhoni. But I just wanted to, like you said, peel the layers of the MS Dhoni we see and find out how he reached that level by purely being himself and being comfortable in his own skin.
And you spoke to different people. Like I think you spoke to Param. We've seen in the movie as well the someone who was way elder to him, but managed to get him his first kit, a bat, and really supported him. He was a sports good owner. Then, of course, there are other stories. Like there's a friend of his who also played for Jharkhand, but is unfortunately no more, who taught him the helicopter shot, and different people around his place. In fact, one of his friends also, who's goes by the nickname of Chittu, who's actually been with him ever since he was a young boy. And all these people showed remarkable faith in him through those times. And I think that is the beauty of this story, isn't it?
Oh, very much so. And I think that's also one of the reasons he's kept them so close to him. And the only reason these people opened up was because of MS Dhoni. It's almost like, I put it in the book as well, there's almost like this Omerta code around MS Dhoni. I mean, he's not a mob boss, but he kind of behaves like it in a way, because those people do. They have, like you said, there's been that movie made about him. They have been public. They have given interviews in the past. But the only reason they opened up and they invited me to Ranchi and took me around Ranchi, showed me a side of Ranchi and the MS Dhoni story that they hadn't shown to anyone else was purely because of MS, and the reason that he showed that faith in me that when I approached him and I said, this is the book I'm writing. I know you're never going to speak to me, but is there any way that the people behind you would allow them to speak to me? So it took almost a month and a half of, I wouldn't say convincing, because with MS Dhoni, there's no convincing him. And as you know, as a journalist, there's no phone or email that can be used to get to MS Dhoni. You can reach anyone else in the world, but not him.
VVS Lakshman also struggled on his retirement.
Exactly, yeah. So the only thing I could do is, this is the 2017 IPL. I drive to Pune because he was playing for Pune at that point.
And I was there for that game, by the way.
You were, exactly, yeah. And hang around practice sessions and bump into him for like 30 seconds when he would go in, 30 seconds when he would come out. And that's where, obviously by then we had known each other for quite a long while. But that's really when he showed that faith and said, you know what, I trust them, I trust you to tell the real story, and I'll open doors for you. And he didn't say that in those very words, but I realized he had when I got a call from Chitu a few days after that, and when he said that, all right, everything's sorted, Mahi has said everything for you. You just have to come to Ranchi, and everything's done for you. There were hotel rooms booked for me. There were like
Wow.
interviews set up for me. So, and purely because MS Dhoni said, this is a guy who's writing on me. And wherever I went in Ranchi, it felt like they knew I was coming. They knew that this guy has come to write this book on MS Dhoni. And yeah, and look, I was very grateful that when the book was launched on his birthday in 2018, just before I left India, he and his wife kind of posed with it. They were over in England at that point, and it just became the launch. I didn't have to really organize the launch after that.
Of course.
It's the man posing with the book. Yeah. So yeah, so it was a fun ride, and the more I got to know about him, the more I respected him, purely because of that reason. Right, in a country like India, it's not very common for someone to come from a background like he did and then stay loyal to that background. I mean, like you see, not just cricketing celebrities, most celebrities in India, after they reach a level, they move to big cities like Bombay, Delhi, or whatever. But the fact that he sticks to Ranchi, sticks to his roots, kind of tells you a lot about him. I'm not saying what the other guys do is wrong or right, but it just tells you more about MS Dhoni and how grounded he is, how he doesn't want to lose the real him, and he feels that if he leaves that behind, and it's not that he can't fit into any other, he can be the corporate guy, he can be the military guy, all about his interest, he can be the wise sage in the cricket dressing room, but behind all that, all he wants to be on a daily basis is just the same MS Dhoni he's always been, and which I kind of respect, but I can also relate with it. So which kind of made it like you said, it's not just a book about a cricketer's journey, but it goes beyond that. It's something that, like you correctly pointed out, we all can take lessons from it and somehow reach a point where we do get comfortable in our own skin.
And there is one quote in that book which really stood out for me the first time I've read that book. Now, I've read your book a couple of times, I must say that, because
Thank you.
one was obviously to absorb the stories, and two, whenever you're say going through a difficult time, it just motivates you. I think lockdown wasn't easy on a lot of us in our own way, so it does give you that hope. But one quote stood out for me where Param says, see, he has changed our lives and you are going to write this book, look what it does for you, in a sense that we talk about a captain with a Midas touch. Of course, things worked out for him, but he also had the guts to do things that a lot of people didn't, and he did that at the highest level and won those tournaments. But this whole aura and this whole image around him, that he's a guy who's a kind of a lucky charm, and he could also turn your luck around. He could turn players' luck around. But this time, Param is telling you, an author, a broadcaster, that you know what, you're writing a book about him, even your luck's going to turn.
Oh, it's the level of loyalty almost that they have with this guy, because it goes to the loyalty he's shown to them. Right, when one of the really early MS Dhoni ads came to being, or actually it wasn't an early ad, it was one of those ads where they shoot the real MS Dhoni in his real setting. He insisted that Chittu and Param, or Chotu as he called them, they were in that ad, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners would have seen that ad back in the day. I don't remember what product it was now, but it's just about, and it's a telling advertisement as well, because it ends with one of them saying, "Arey, sab kuch badal gaya, but tu nahi badla." And then MS Dhoni says, like, "Ye kabhi nahi badlega," and he kind of puts his arm around his friend. So even though it's a TV advert, that's just MS Dhoni in a nutshell. And you're right. It's interesting going to Ranchi and meeting those people, and how much faith they have in MS Dhoni. Not now, but they've always had that faith in him, that and at that point when he was a nobody, they were sacrificing so much to make sure that he gets his best opportunity to live his dream, which is to play cricket for India. And the fact that they did that for him, and not everybody remembers their journey, right? Like people who just in the history of the world, people who get to a point in life of fame and success often can not intentionally, but just because they don't have the time, can overlook the people who were there at the start to, like, pick them up. But MS Dhoni has never done that. He's always gone back to them. Even now, if you see him on a golf course, Chittu is always there. Whether he knows to play golf or not is irrelevant, right? He's always there. He surrounded himself with his own people rather than. And think about it. It's MS Dhoni. There would be hundreds of people, industrialists, and people with money and influence throwing themselves at him just to be close to MS Dhoni. But he's always kept a lot of them at bay, and he's always kept that coterie of people that he grew up with around him, which is one of the reasons they have that level of loyalty towards him, but also that feeling of look, he's and another quote that stood out for me from when I think back is Chittu, the other guy, saying he never leaves anyone behind. He's very clear with that. If MS Dhoni is going ahead in life, so will everyone else. I remember Chittu saying there was a time many years ago when he was going through some financial issues. And one day he just comes home and Chittu's mom is crying. And he says, "What happened?" And he says, "No, I mean, I know he told me not to say this to you, but like Mahi was here. He heard about, I mean, he knows about your troubles. He sorted everything out." But that's the kind of guy MS Dhoni really is. So, but at the same time, another thing I did also learn is if you cross him, if he is very selective with people, which is why he doesn't have a million friends. But if you cross him in a way he feels that he can't trust you anymore, he does slowly but surely cut you off from your life. And I remember one night while I was in Ranchi, Chittu was taking me around. There's some pan shop which is very famous. So he took me there, and while we were there, we bumped into two guys who I had never met before. But they happened to be MS Dhoni's former friends who were very close to him. But then something happened, and that relationship just ended. And I remember asking MS about it, and he didn't give me too much detail, but he did say, "Yeah, I mean, they used to be my friends once upon a time." So I think it's just the way he is that convinces people that you stick with him and you will grow, especially if you can maintain that same level of trust and loyalty with him.
One of my highlights of working as a media manager in the IPL has been actually those interactions with him, those small little interactions with him. And I'll narrate this one, and maybe you can tell me something similar, because it just told me about the person. So this was our first ever game once the COVID pandemic had struck, and it was in Abu Dhabi. And from being a media manager, I'm suddenly a guy in the bubble. And I have to also do operational stuff. So the first day was, of course, a little intimidating because there's a match happening. Doesn't matter the amount of reading you do, doesn't matter the amount of briefings you attend in the lead up to the match.
True.
Match day is different whether you're a player or not. And I made the big sin of walking across the side screen a couple of times, and without noticing, because my office door was really next to the side screen, and I didn't notice that the bowling was from this end, and a fire needed to be put out. I don't mean a real fire, but something. And I just rushed out a couple of times, and play had to be stopped. And everyone knows how I worship cricket, and that's one thing that I would not do. But then at the end of the game, obviously maintaining social distance, MS just called out to me, and I was wearing my mask and everything. Just, can you come here? And we just had a chat, and and I told him, I sort of, because I said, he told me the importance of the side screen, and I sort of opened up to him. Like, I don't know why I did. And I told him, like, what, MS, I worship this game, and this is an error, and I feel so terrible about it. And I told him, like, today is the first time I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and I'm so overwhelmed. And I don't know why, I just opened up to him. And he just looked at me, and he just said a couple of things, and it just made me calm. And he gave me this one line, and it stayed with me since. And I tell myself that in his voice, where he told me, "You know what? Accidents happen when you don't think." He said, "Always remember, you've got that extra second to think, even though your mind tells you it doesn't. So take that extra second, you'll make the right decision." And after that, whenever I've panicked, I've told myself that, and it's really helped me. And it just told me how he could make me comfortable and, come down to a level where he could empathize with maybe the kind of task that I had that day.
No, that's a lovely anecdote, and it really tells you everything you need to know about MS Dhoni again. Yeah, I mean, he does have this saintly vibe to him. I remember one of the things that one of his friends, I think Chotu was the one, Param was the one who told me, is that wo saas leta rehta hai, like, he always takes a deep breath. And this is exactly what he was trying to tell you, right? There is nothing that you need to rush for in life if you actually plan it well and if you continue just taking deep breaths. And that basically is the secret to living in the moment, right? Like, or living every moment like it's the first and last moment. It's easier said than done. Not everybody can do it, but he's just found a way of doing it. And you're right. I mean, I've had a lot of these little interactions with him, whether it's with my hair. I remember he pulled me aside one day and said, I keep telling you about cutting your hair. What I mean by that is, if you just layer it a little, you'll still have the same length, but it'll be less heavy, like it'll be less weight. It'll just be the better density. I was like, wow, I mean, you didn't have as good, your quality of hair wasn't as good as mine. Sorry, MS, but how do you know so much about hair or whatever it is? It is always a piece of like advice. I remember in 2016 in Zimbabwe where, I was one of two journalists covering that tour, and I was sent
where you changed 4 flights.
Exactly. Yeah. I did. So I was sent exclusively by the Indian Express to keep an eye on MS Dhoni, because this is around the time when you thought he might retire. He just quit as captain earlier that year, but then the Indian selectors picked him as captain for that tour with a lot of youngsters. Like KL Rahul made his debut there. Yuzvendra Chahal made his name. Jasprit Bumrah. I remember him pulling me aside and pointing at Bumrah and saying, "This is 2016, like Bumrah's first year of international cricket." And he said that this guy will be a future captain. Just mark my words. And I was like,
Wow.
really? Okay, fine. Yeah, this is way back in 2016. But yeah, there is that side to him. I know we would occasionally have a chat about my personal life, and he would. He knew my wife was Bengali, so we'd have a couple of things to say about just her being Bengali and me not being from there. And it's a lot of those things. But that's just your anecdote is just a perfect illustration of how he leads his life, but how he also expects people to and I think, like a lot of great people, I've also seen at times him not getting why someone else can't live like him, and which is again a reason most of the people he's really close to are to at the risk of not finding any other expression in my head at the moment, sons of the soil in that sense, are very down to earth, earthy fellows. Like, you just see his friends like Kedar Jadhav and Monu Singh and those guys who are really people who understand what it is to be from that part of India. Like, people like you and me, especially you, at least moved to India. Like, growing up in urban India, you don't really at some level connect with the real India, if that makes sense. So we are grounded in our own way, but I don't think we can ever be as grounded as a lot of people who come from a sort of hinterland. And I think that's something that MS Dhoni is always connected with. And even his great interest in the military, and when he goes to one of the key figures in that book was one of his great friends, Colonel Shankar Wembu, who spoke about the number of times MS Dhoni would go visit an army camp, and the way he was always more comfortable interacting with the soldiers than with the generals, even though you would think that he is at that level. He's like, he's a celebrity. For him, it would be a big challenge to come down to the level of your soldier and interact with them. But he always felt like he was closer to the Fauji than he was with the, fancy feasts that would be laid out for him by people in charge of the camp. But again, that's just MS Dhoni, and he'll never change. He'll always be that guy.
Yes. And, again, I remember I was in law school and we had people from all over the country. This was a national law school. And right. I remember people who were from Bihar and Jharkhand, the kind of affinity they had for him, like even people who weren't cricket fans. I remember one of them telling me that इन्हें पता है कि हमने life कैसे देखी है. Yeah. And he wasn't even from one of the big cities. He wasn't from Patna or Ranchi or a Jamshedpur. He was from a nondescript place, where he said, it was very difficult to get to. But he said, इन्हें पता है कि हमारी जिंदगी कैसे चलती है. Like, he knows how we live. And
Yeah.
for those people, he became a representation of sorts.
Very much so. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And going back to his interactions with the soldiers,
Hmm.
when you do come from the agricultural
Hmm.
part of India, or where agriculture is your main thing, the one thing that concerns you more than anything is weather, right? Because, and it's the same everywhere. Like even
Hmm.
here now that I live in the Adelaide Hills, you meet a lot of people whose livelihood is the farm, is their farm. So they have a unique understanding of weather that you and I don't, because I mean, for us, it's just a case of what clothes we wear, or like whether we need to
Hmm.
apply sunscreen or not. For them, everything depends on the weather.
Yes.
So, Colonel Shankar had told me how whenever MS Dhoni would go and meet the soldiers, well, he would ask them where they're from, and if once he knew which part of India or which part of northern
Hmm.
India they were from, the first thing he would ask is about their farm, kheti kaisa chal raha hai, or what's
Hmm.
the weather like? The rains haven't been too good, because immediately he would connect, or the so young soldier speaking to him would connect with what MS Dhoni is talking about, because he would have heard from his father back home in working in the fields and the farms, so he would know exactly what is happening with his family farm or his family field, and you just feel more at ease. Then, like, then you forget that you're speaking to MS Dhoni. You're just speaking to someone who understands your language in a way, not without speaking the specific language. So that's just him. And at the same time, he could walk up to a corporate head and ask him about certain things that or what it takes to run a business. And I remember in 2017, one of those times when I was waiting for him to just walk past me, somebody brought a new drone camera to the field, and this is after a training session. And him and another fascinating cricketer I'm really fond of, and I've grown close to, Steve Smith, was captain at that point.
Yeah.
And these two stayed back after the practice session, and they spent like at least half an hour just getting their heads around this drone camera, how to use it, how to get it going, and that's how, like, if it catches if it caught his fancy, MS Dhoni, that is, he would just go so deep into it, regardless of whether it had something to do with cricket or not, or whether it was something that he knew about or not. But at the same time, he was very Sherlock Holmesian in his ways. Like, he only
True.
was interested in what made a difference to him. Or if someone would come and speak to him about an astronaut, or someone would come and speak to him about an athlete from a sport that MS Dhoni has no interest about, he would not have a clue about what they're talking about, because he feels that, like, there's a limited space in your hard drive. I'm not going to fill it up with information that I'm never going to use or I'm not going to need. So he's so unique in that sense, which just made the whole process of writing a book on him even more fascinating.
Yeah, 100%. And, the other thing about him is the way he can also maybe hold a conversation with anyone, because as I said, he gave me those tips. But I also remember in one of those, again, COVID IPLs, where we were arranging the awards ahead of
Right.
a presentation
Oh,
ceremony, and
yes.
he was the winning captain for the end time, and he was standing, waiting for his turn. And my colleague and I are talking about, what we would do going back to the hotel,
Oh,
because
yeah.
we just had each other for company, because it was a
Yeah,
bubble, only a
exactly.
few of us. So, we would just talk about it, and what we would do, maybe, just play a round of PlayStation, and then just, go back to our rooms, relax, and then next day have breakfast, maybe another round of PlayStation, because we had our game
Yeah.
was a little bit away. And just the way, he could sort of connect even with that, and
Yeah.
tell us, maybe just telling us, how he spends his time in his room,
Yeah.
or how he unwinds. It was so refreshing, in a sense that we just felt that this isn't someone who's won 3 ICC trophies, but just another guy sitting there
Yeah.
telling us, what, you guys may be relaxing like this, but, I relax in this way. Maybe
This
you can
way.
try that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, look, very few people, especially with sport, successful sports people, are able to separate the real them and from the the image that they portray on a sporting field, or even once they have become that celebrity, right? Very few people are able to do that. Like, a lot of them I know, I've spoken to over the years, want to do that, but they just can't do it. They just don't know how to do it. They kind of lose the real them in the process of the single-mindedness that you need to be successful in whatever sport you play, and then you kind of forget who you were, and you want to tap into it, but you can't. He's just somehow maintained, despite reaching the highest level possible in Indian cricket or world cricket, he just maintained that real him. Like you said, you can just end up speaking to him about random things, where
Yeah.
and you're like, oh wait, why are you interested in that? Like, and how does that impact your life? Like, and having said that, one person, I mean, another super celebrity in India in cricket, Virat Kohli, I have seen uh, instances where he can do that as well, but he does it in a different way. Because I like there were three back-to-back Caribbean tours in 11, 13, and 17, where more or less it was just Virat and I, especially in 13 and 17. So we got to know each other quite well in terms of having these random conversations. I remember once in Sri Lanka, we were talking about how both of us agree that having both of us, I don't know whether he grew up with dogs, but he's always had a dog, or he's had a dog in the last few years at home. I've grown up with dogs, and we both agreed about how in cities like Bombay and Delhi, it's a crime to have certain dogs like a Siberian Husky, just because they're not built to survive in
Yeah.
those conditions. Even if you're super rich and you have them in air conditioned rooms throughout the day, and so you can speak to him about those kind of things, or even during that COVID T2020, the famous tour that India made here, and he played the first test. I remember a lot of Indian cricketers asking me about the restrictions in Australia and why they were so tight, and some of them felt like it was unfair and it was being done just to hold them back. But Virat was the one guy who actually got it. He said, "Yeah, I mean, you guys don't have a lot of COVID cases because of the rules that this country has in place," and he's got that worldly wise approach, or he's developed it over time. I think MS Dhoni's is different, but I think Virat is another guy who has managed to somehow, and I think being married to another celebrity always helps in that sense. Not that I have any personal experience, but I just have seen him, like, because they can kind of bounce off everything off each other. And I think it has helped him grow for sure. So he's another guy I can see that. But MS Dhoni just does it or has done it at a level never seen before in Indian cricket for sure.
You spoke about the 2020 tour, and I was going to come to that next, because Miracle Makers is the other book that you've written. And this is a fascinating series. And I'll tell you why it was so important for people in India. Was we were here, lockdown had impacted everyone's life in some way. The future was uncertain, but I still remember there's one quote that I keep using, and I've used it time and again. And I say, anything can be your Adelaide 36 all out, but it's up to you whether you rise up to Melbourne
Yeah,
and Brisbane and Sydney and Brisbane.
yeah, true.
Tell us about that experience of watching that test series. We almost forget there was an ODI and T20 series before.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, which is one of the main reasons, and I'm glad you brought that up, the white ball series, which is as important as the test series. It is just that the test series became what it was. People forgot about it, and I made it a point to uh, keep one chapter purely on the white ball series, but built it around Hardik Pandya, because I thought he had a tremendous start to that series. And the Hardik Pandya we see today, the mature, Hardik Pandya 2.0
Yes,
or 3.0, it all started there. I remember
it did.
seeing that Hardik Pandya, and I've seen Hardik Pandya since his day one in international cricket or high level cricket, playing for the Mumbai Indians. But this was a different Hardik. And it was just a crazy time here as well. We were very fortunate in Australia, especially for us in South Australia, to be almost kept at bay from the COVID pandemic. I mean, there were people who died, there were restrictions, but nowhere compared to, like, forget India, even Melbourne. Melbourne was the most
Yeah.
shut down city in the world, wasn't it? For the lockdown city in the world. But just I remember going to Melbourne, suddenly you had to wear a mask, and we didn't have to wear a mask in Adelaide. That's how lucky we were. Yeah, so it was a different kind of build up to the series. There was so much talk of what would happen if India don't come. Cricket Australia was going through a lot of turmoil behind the scenes in terms of their administration. We had just gotten used to the concept of Zoom calls. Everything was on Zoom. And then a lot of people didn't expect India to even come, right? Like, there was Virat Kohli on the screens on every news channel every evening for weeks and months leading into that tour. But a lot of people did not expect India to come. But when it was agreed that they would come, the question was, how long will they last? Like, how long before it becomes so difficult and they go? And that kind of narrative stayed on, or that kind of chatter stayed on till the very end. because it wasn't easy for the Indian team. Even though, yes, you were in Australia, you're away from the tragedy that was COVID in India, you still staying in hotels with tiny rooms, which is just the reality of hotels in Australia and in England, right? Like they're not the mega 5-star, 7-star hotels of India. I mean, there are some fancy hotels here, but nothing quite like what you get in India, which is why a lot of foreign cricketers love to come to India these days, or have in the last 10, 15 years. So tiny rooms, a lot of them were traveling with family. It was a lot to endure for them, but the fact that they held it together for that long, despite everything that happened. Like Adelaide 36 was an aberration, but fortunately for us, or especially for me, if Adelaide 36 had not had happened, my series would have ended there because of all the border closures. The only reason I was able to escape Adelaide was because of 36 all out in the game ending on day 3. And it was a moving circus in the sense every day the rules changed. Every day we had to tune in at 12 or at noon to see whether our state was locking down with some other state or that state was locking down with this state. Because Australia, the way it is built, it is a federation, right? So the states have enough power to take calls on their own borders, especially in a crisis like this. So, which is why I ended up driving over 5,000 kilometers all around Australia. The moment my tour started one afternoon when Adelaide went into lockdown for just one day, and my wife messaged me and said, "What are you going to do? We're going into lockdown." Maybe she was just trying to get rid of me, but yeah. Anyway, so and all flights were booked out of Adelaide. Everything just happened in a hurry. So I found one rental car that I could find, and I just drove. I just had to leave the state. I spent a night in Broken Hill, which is why I start the book in Broken Hill. It's a tiny little town. It's called the Silver City, on the border of New South Wales and South Australia. So I just had to go past it, and I had to go through the proper outback because I couldn't take the usual route to go to Sydney. So it took me like nearly 2 days to get there. And there were times when I was driving, I realized, wait, it's been 3 hours since I saw someone. It's been 4 hours since I had phone signal, and it's been like nearly 2 hours since I saw even a kangaroo. This is basically just me. If my car breaks down here, I'm lost to the world. There's like no way I could have survived, or I could have. That is it. I don't know how many days I would have survived, but then nobody would have found me ever. Like so, that's how crazy it was. That's just what was happening around the cricket. But then the cricket itself was unbelievable. The one-day series was great. Australia starts strong, and then India come back on the back end of that one-day series, and then they win the T20 series. This whole Ravindra Jadeja, was he concussed or was he not controversy happening. And while that's happening, the red ball players are having their own practice sessions far away, and Gaurav Joshi, who's a good friend of yours as well, and I are like crawling around the bush trying to watch some practice from like the little gap there was in the fence and in between the black cloth that the Indian cricket team had made sure was around the ground. We did all that to just keep an eye on what was happening and to know what was happening, because there was no real idea of how long this tour is going to last. Forget, like I said earlier, forget the results and all of that. But I was really fortunate that Ravi Shastri and Bharat Arun, who I'm really close to, we have been for many years. So they made sure that I knew what was happening behind the scenes. But at the same time, even for me, it was, even though I'd left Indian cricket in a way in 2018 when I came to Australia. The test team in particular, they're all my generation, right? We all started cricket in the sense, or we broke into international cricket at the same time. They're doing different things. I never call it my debut. I don't count my test matches and all of that. But we broke into this but at the same time, we are part of the same industry, right? Cricket feeds.
Would have been the likes of Pujara, Rahane,
all of them,
all around the same time. Yeah,
literally, like whether it's Rohit or Ashwin or Virat or Pujara, Rahane, all of them pretty much are from Jadeja. That between 2007 and 2009, if you think about it, right? They all came onto the scene at that time. So they're my generation. Like, we've seen each other. We had seen each other at that point for 12, 13 years over the years. Like, not saying I was like best friends with any of them, but it just felt like it was meant to be. Like, we were all together. So there was a lot of like fun stuff from that series, and the cricket just stole your breath away. But there was one point, Nisha, during the Sydney test in particular, when Ashwin and Vihari did what they did, where that's when the realization hit home that we're watching something we'll never watch again. Like in terms of everything that had happened around it. And then the morning of the Brisbane Test, when Natarajan made his debut, it took me back to this net session before the Adelaide Test, when Natarajan was held back as a reserve bowler, and he was bowling beautifully. And I remember just jokingly asking Ravi as he walked off, as he was walking off, I said, "Ye Natarajan ko khila do." So Ravi said, "Arey khila de, chal chal, usko bhi khila dete hain." This is like before the series began. Like, and when Natarajan was picked, I remember messaging Ravi saying, like, only you and I knew this was going to happen. Like it had to. Like, and then Washington Sundar playing that test match, it was just bizarre. Like it was more bizarre than anything else. And the fact that India went into that last test with that kind of bowling attack, where Mohammad Siraj is suddenly the leader of the attack, and then for that team to end this whole Gabatoir thing, we'll never see the likes of that series again. Which is why I thought, you know what, this has to be. And also, I was under a lot of pressure to write a book. I was getting messages from people in India who I'd never met before saying, "You better write a book or we'll come for your life." So I said, "Okay, you know what? I'll do this book." And that's how it came about.
Exactly. And, talking about Sydney or Brisbane, and this is what happened at home here. I'd returned from the UAE after the IPL, of course.
Oh, right.
And
Yes.
around the same time that India left for Australia. So I stayed back in the UAE. I remember just before I left, Indian team left for Australia. They started their quarantine. I came back to India. And Mumbai was at the time, it was strict. So even I had to do a 14-day home quarantine.
Yeah.
So I was home, and a couple of matches I had to watch in my own room, and I couldn't go out. So obviously, it was that series was so critical, because at the same time, being in the sports industry, being a freelancer, you too didn't know what was next.
Yes.
And fine, you've come through one IPL, but what's next? You don't know. And even your family is sort of trying to help you figure that out. They're trying to be supportive. And I remember the final days of Sydney and Gabba, and those are two of my favorite memories with my dad, because my dad also is a cricket lover, but he's a share trader. So on both days, he left his share trading and he came to watch, especially on the Sydney, and it's peak time when, when you have to trade. And my dad's portals are open in his office room. He's not bothering, and he's clapping for every dot ball that Ashwin and Vihari were facing. And at the Gabba, and when just before Washington Sundar hit that six, and he just turns to me, he's like, "You know what, this is, if we don't get a big over right now, it's going to be a draw." And this man has not traded for an hour. He's just watching this game, and he's like, and I thought, okay, at least please, he's just given up one more day of trading, win this game for him. It in many ways, and I told Ravi this many months later when, again, I had the fortune of meeting him when he finished his coaching tenure at the T20 World Cup, and I was working on the World Cup, and we were saying our goodbyes. We were in the same hotel, and I just told him, "Thank you for that. You don't know what it means in different ways to a lot of people."
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. That's so true. And I didn't realize this early on during that tour, but sometime during that test series in particular, I realized I have this responsibility of being the eyes and ears, I'm still Indian in that sense. So I have this whole responsibility of being the eyes and ears for all the millions and millions of people back in India, not just people in the media, but just overall. And to kind of give people the story behind the story. And my favorite story from that tour was the Rishabh Pant one, when I'm there in the nets, and it's funny, so nobody thought he would come and bat in Sydney. Then from the corner of my eye, I was off air. I wasn't on air doing commentary. I saw him sneaking away to the nets at the SCG. So I didn't tell anyone. I just quietly just went there. And there's Rishabh Pant with the physio and a couple of the throwdown guys. And this is when Gill and Rohit Sharma had started India's innings. And Rishabh Pant is there, and he's willing himself to fight through the pain. He keeps telling himself, "Tujhe kuch nahi hua hai, chal chal, tujhe kuch nahi hua hai." And he's encouraging the throwdown guys to chuck balls at him, at his body. They're reluctant to do that because he's got a broken forearm. And the physio Nitin Patel is there, a kind of figuring out what to tell this young kid who's just so desperate to play that, as the physio, he has to draw the line. And while all this is happening, the match is still going on. And from where I was stood back then, there used to be this big shamiana they used to build, or a tent behind the SCG nets. Now that whole thing has
Yeah.
changed, where they would have
Oh,
all
has
the
it? Yeah, I remember
yeah,
that.
they would have all the corporate guests, and there were like television screens in there. So every time it was for a 15-20 minute session. Every time the crowd went up, these guys with Rishabh Pant and Nitin Patel, all of them would stop their session and turn to me. So then it was my job to look at the TV because there's a little lag and see what has happened and then kind of signal four or say Rohit ne single liya. It's like I was literally like reenacting what was happening in the match by watching the television and letting them know. And then they would go back to batting. And I remember just as they left, as Rishabh left, Nitin Patel said, Australia won't be ready for the surprise. And at that point, I didn't know what surprise that they were talking about. It was only the next day when Rishabh Pant walked out at number 5. They were like, oh, so this was the surprise that they were talking about. And I mean, there's a little lesson on journalism as well. I never tweeted that out. I waited for that to happen and write the story. And if you are a young journalist listening to this, always remember, your employer is not X or Twitter or whatever, or Instagram or Facebook. Your employer is who sent you to cover this tour or whoever you're writing for. So your loyalty should always rest with them. Don't tweet out stuff that you will use in a story. I know ever since I've come to Australia, I tweet out a lot and I do all those things, but I'll never do that to a story that would, once you've written the story, you tweet it out. So I held on to it. Nobody knew about this till it happened. And it so happened that the Ashwin Vihari partnership happened. It just became a beautiful intro to my story about that day, about that special day. But, there were so many of these little stories that I've even like forgotten now. Like it all comes back to me all of a sudden when I, see something happen on the television screens. And everyone was emotional. Like Ravi Shastri was so emotional. I remember they called me after the Sydney test. All like so R. Sridhar, Ravi Shastri, and Bharat Tarun, like on the same phone call, they kept taking turns. And they were so emotional. They were celebrating that draw. They said, whatever happens at the Gabba, we've lost half the team anyway. Nothing can compare to this. In the sense they didn't realize that they were going to win at the Gabba, right? Yeah. So they said we've already like won the series in that sense, right? By drawing this test match. Obviously, a week later, everything changed, and just so I couldn't get to Brisbane. Like I said, finally the borders caught up with me. So I was doing commentary for that test match from the Sydney studios of the radio station I work for, and Brad Haddon was my co-commentator, and just the way the Australians, this hard, the tough Australians, kind of they embraced this Indian team. And the way they got emotional around it. So while Brad Haddon and I were in Sydney, Ian Healy was at the Gabba. So in between session breaks, we would have like sessions, or we would just have like chats where I was in the Sydney studio and Ian Healy was at the Gabba. And just in the last 20 minutes, and speaking of responsibility, right? So my stints were done for the day. But when India got closer and closer, I got a call from the producer and he said, you know what, mate, jump on. Like, we want you on air when India win this because it looked like India was going to win this. And then I'm thinking, oh God, like now I have to like really dramatize this event, right? And I'm a pretty chilled out guy. Nothing gets me overexcited. But I had to get myself, I had to like rile myself up to do that. And Ian Healy was on air from the Gabba. And that winning moment when Rishabh Pant hits the boundary, Jared Waitley calls it. And then I respond to it. And for those of you listening to this, Jared Waitley is, if you haven't heard him before, he's the guy who said shot of the emperor. He's the guy who was on air when Virat Kohli played that masterful innings last year at the MCG, and he was on air with me. And if you are listening to this, I wasn't just a stupid idiot just sitting there. I was doing commentary as well, but my commentary wasn't part of the highlights package. That's a lot of people have messaged me, have said, why do you have the headset on and you're saying nothing? Because that's how they clipped that video out. Anyway, that's an aside. So Jared Waitley was on air and like he called the winning runs. Then it came to me and then I don't know what I said, but it was really it really played up the occasion because it was a big occasion. And when Ian Healy was there, and Ian Healy, I could hear him be emotional. Like imagine Ian Healy. We grew up like watching Ian Healy, like cutthroat, wouldn't give a quarter to anyone. Like he got emotional and he said, "This is the greatest Test series win I have ever experienced in my life. I've ever witnessed in my life." So the fact that this Indian team could soften up those hard-nosed Australians kind of tells you how went beyond just it being a great series win. But it became like the most miraculous, remarkable series win ever. And between you and me, Nishad, and everyone listening, I got a lot of flack from a lot of former India greats because I called it the greatest series win ever. Like, people who've been part of other
Hmm.
series been saying, like, well, okay, fine. I mean, it's a great win, but how was it the greatest? Like, this was greater, that was great. I said, look, in my opinion, based on everything I experienced during those 2 months, I thought this was more special than anything else. So, like, I mean, that's always up to the person's opinion, right? Like, that's just my opinion. So we'll see. I can't see any series matching up to it in terms of just the drama around it. Hopefully not. I mean, that we would have to get into another pandemic. Let's not hope for it. Let's just be happy with what we got and the book that I wrote.
And you're 100% right. And at the time, I was writing the book on the 1971 series,
Right.
and where India won in England and then the Western,
Yes.
first in the West Indies and then in England. So
Yeah.
I just thought, in terms of significance, that one was right up there,
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
what it meant to Indian cricket back then was a sort of the world hearing India's voice.
Yeah. Oh,
Just a
absolutely.
24-year-old nation. This, in a sense, was about dealing with a pandemic. It
Yeah.
was about dealing with different things, like your captain had to fly back for his firstborn, and obviously
Yes.
he would fly back because
Yeah, obviously. Yeah.
your firstborn is being born during a pandemic. You'd want to
Yeah, I
be
know.
there for your family. Then you've got all these other restrictions. It's not easy being in a bubble, having been in multiple ones. I can tell you, in
Correct.
hard bubbles, it's not easy. So dealing with all these things, I agree with you. The 2001 series, yes, was great for India,
Yeah.
but in context of this, and one of the players who played the 2001 series also agreed with me. He said
Good.
that, boss, हमने जो किया था वो था, पर ये वाला जो है ना,
Yeah.
ये कुछ अलग ही है.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you're doing it away. You're doing it with the kind
Yeah.
of players you had, and you're doing it against a full strength Australian team who were. I mean, yes, they missed David Warner for the first two tests, but just overall, it's the same bowling attack from 4 years or 2 years prior to that. And this Australian team was hungry to kind of prove a point that, yeah, India, you won 2 years ago. But now that we have Smith back, and okay, they didn't have Warner, but Manas had become Manas by then in that gap. We'll tell you how it is. We'll tell you that was sort of yes, not a fluke, but you won. There would always be riders attached to the fact that you won in 2018-19. So that's how hungry this Australian team was. And for this Indian team to beat that Australian team was like, yeah, look, and and another thing that I really took a lot of pride in was because of my wrestling love. I kept talking about the lead up to the Gabba test that if the Undertaker streak can end at WrestleMania, then there's no question that Australia's streak would be. So before the start of play, my first segment would be like this thing 10 minutes before the start of play. On that morning, when nobody gave India a chance to win, right? Like when they started their run chase that morning, SEN and Jared like played the commentary from that WrestleMania when Brock Lesnar beats Undertaker, and it was almost like ha ha ha, like see, this is where it is. Like, so you called for the end of the Gabba streak, just like the Undertaker streak. Let's see if it happens, and it did. Like, nobody thought. I mean, even now, I think the Undertaker should not have lost, but this streak the Australians had at the Gabba should also not have been ended by the team that that ended it. Like, with Mohammad Siraj, the most senior member of that bowling attack.
Well, thank you to all our listeners. And yes, do follow us on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. And if you want to connect with us on social media, then on YouTube, join us on Digital 2 Sports, and on Instagram, you can connect with me at Nishad Parivaidya.